Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor and a humble heart that I address you today about the power of trusting God's plan. Let me begin by saying this: you are not a mistake and your life is not an accident. Every breath you take is a divine confirmation that you were designed for a purpose. But let's be honest, life doesn't always feel purposeful, does it? There are seasons of confusion, pain, and uncertainty that leave us questioning, God, where are you? What are you doing in my life? Let me assure you of this truth: God's plan for your life is perfect, even when it doesn't seem logical. Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." When we try to control every detail of our lives, we end up carrying burdens we were never designed to bear. We worry about tomorrow, stress over things outside our control, and often make choices based on fear instead of faith. But when you let God handle it, when you truly surrender your plans, your fears, and your timeline to Him, you activate a divine alignment that brings peace and clarity. The trust begins with relationship. You cannot trust someone you don't know. God is not a distant figure watching from afar. He is your creator, your sustainer, and your loving Father. He knows the number of hairs on your head and the desires of your heart. When you seek to know Him through His word, through prayer, and through worship, you begin to see that His nature is good, faithful, and unchanging. Here's a hard truth: you are not in control, and that's okay. When you insist on controlling your life, you limit what God can do through you. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Surrender is not a sign of weakness, it is a demonstration of faith. Trusting God often means stepping into the unknown. Abraham left his home without knowing where God would lead him. Joseph endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before God elevated him to a position of influence. When you let God handle it, you may not always understand His methods, but you can trust His motives. He works all things together for your good and His glory. Friends, the beauty of trusting God's plan is that it brings freedom. Freedom from anxiety, freedom from doubt, and freedom from the fear of failure. When you allow God to guide your steps, you align yourself with His divine will, and His power begins to manifest in your life. I challenge you today to release whatever you've been holding on to, whether it's fear, anger, or the need to control, and place it in God's hands. He is able, He is willing, and He is faithful to complete the good work He has started in you. Trust His plan. Let Him handle it. And watch as He turns every trial into triumph, every obstacle into opportunity, and every setback into a setup for your destiny. God's plan is flawless, a truth that forms the cornerstone of faith for believers seeking direction and purpose. The idea that God's plan is perfect can seem abstract, but its educational value lies in unpacking its practical application to life's uncertainties. To understand the perfection of God's plan, one must first grasp the nature of God. Scripture teaches us that God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. This means that He knows everything, has the power to accomplish anything, and is present everywhere at all times. With this divine perspective, God orchestrates events in ways that far exceed human understanding. This foundational truth sets the stage for exploring how God's plan is perfect in all aspects of life. God's perfection can be seen in the balance of His sovereignty and our free will. While God has a divine plan, He has also given us the ability to make choices. This does not mean that human actions can derail God's plan. Rather, it means that God's plan accounts for our decisions, even those that may seem contrary to His will. Romans 8:28 declares that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. This verse highlights how God weaves even the mistakes, failures, and trials of life into the tapestry of His perfect plan. Education about God's perfect plan also involves studying the lives of individuals in the Bible. Characters like Joseph provide a vivid illustration of how God's plan unfolds in ways that may not initially seem ideal but ultimately prove perfect. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned. From a human perspective, these events appear to be setbacks or evidence of abandonment. However, in God's perfect plan, these challenges position Joseph to become a leader in Egypt and save countless lives during a famine. Joseph's story teaches that God's plan often involves seasons of preparation that may feel uncomfortable or even painful. Understanding God's plan as perfect also addresses the human tendency to seek immediate gratification or answers. In a world driven by instant results, waiting on God can feel like a test of patience. However, waiting is often a crucial component of God's plan. Isaiah 40:31 reminds us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Waiting refines character, builds faith, and aligns us with God's timing. Education about this principle encourages believers to embrace seasons of waiting as opportunities for growth rather than periods of frustration. Another educational dimension of God's perfect plan lies in recognizing that His plans are tailored to each individual. Jeremiah 29:11 states, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." This verse highlights God's personal investment in each life. His plan is not a one-size-fits-all blueprint, but a customized path that takes into account every individual's gifts, weaknesses, and potential. Teaching this truth equips individuals to stop comparing their journeys to others and trust that God's plan for them is uniquely suited to them. Trust is a vital aspect of human life, influencing personal decisions, relationships, and overall well-being. However, when it comes to trusting God, this trust cannot exist without a foundational relationship with Him. Just as trust between two people grows through time, communication, and shared experiences, trust in God requires intentional effort to know Him, understand His character, and recognize His role in our lives. Developing a relationship with God is a transformative process that not only deepens faith but also provides clarity and assurance during life's challenges. The starting point for building a relationship with God is understanding who He is. God is not an abstract concept or a distant force. He is a personal being who desires to connect with His creation. The Bible provides a comprehensive guide to understanding God's attributes such as His love, mercy, justice, and faithfulness. For instance, the Bible describes God as a loving Father who is compassionate and forgiving. This knowledge is essential because trust is rooted in belief. You cannot trust someone whose character you doubt or misunderstand. By studying the Scriptures, believers gain insight into God's consistent nature and His unwavering commitment to their well-being. Communication is a cornerstone of any strong relationship, and the same is true in developing trust with God. Prayer is a powerful tool that fosters open communication with Him. Through prayer, believers can express their thoughts, concerns, gratitude, and desires. It is important to note that prayer is not a one-way street but a dialogue. By spending time in prayer, believers not only share their hearts with God but also open themselves to receiving His guidance, wisdom, and peace. The more time spent in genuine prayer, the more a person becomes attuned to God's voice and His presence in their daily lives. Another essential element in building a relationship with God is worship. Worship is more than singing songs or attending religious services. It is a lifestyle of honoring God and acknowledging His greatness. Worship helps believers shift their focus from their problems to God's power and faithfulness. This shift in perspective strengthens trust because it reminds believers of God's ability to handle any situation. Additionally, worship cultivates gratitude and a deeper appreciation for God's blessings, which reinforces the believer's confidence in His plan. Understanding God's track record of faithfulness is another critical aspect of building trust. The Bible is filled with stories of how God kept His promises and provided for His people, even in the most difficult circumstances. From delivering the Israelites from slavery to fulfilling His promise to Abraham and Sarah, these accounts serve as powerful reminders of God's reliability. In the same way, reflecting on personal experiences of God's faithfulness can strengthen trust. When believers recall moments when God provided, protected, or guided them, they build a foundation of trust that helps them face future challenges with confidence. Obedience is another practical way to deepen a relationship with God and build trust. Trusting God often requires stepping out in faith and following His guidance even when it seems counterintuitive. Each act of obedience becomes a stepping stone toward greater trust. For example, when Noah obeyed God's instruction to build an ark, despite no visible signs of rain, his trust in God's word was rewarded. Similarly, believers today are encouraged to trust God's instructions even when they do not fully understand His plan. Each act of obedience strengthens the bond of trust and reveals more of God's character and faithfulness. Fellowship with other believers also plays a significant role in building trust in God. Surrounding oneself with a community of faith provides opportunities to learn from others' experiences of God's goodness and faithfulness. Hearing testimonies of answered prayers and divine interventions reinforces the truth that God is trustworthy and actively involved in the lives of His people. In addition, a faith community offers encouragement, support, and accountability, which are essential for maintaining and deepening a relationship with God. Ultimately, building trust in God through relationship requires intentionality and consistency. It involves a commitment to seek Him daily, prioritize time in His presence, and rely on His guidance in every aspect of life. Trust does not develop overnight, but grows steadily as believers nurture their relationship with God through prayer, worship, studying His Word, obedience, and fellowship with others. The idea of releasing control to God is a transformative principle rooted in faith and trust. Human beings naturally desire to control their circumstances and outcomes. This instinct is often driven by the need for security, predictability, and the belief that personal effort can ensure success. However, life frequently proves that certain situations and outcomes are beyond human control. Releasing control to God is not about surrendering responsibility, but about acknowledging His sovereignty, wisdom, and power to guide our lives far better than we can on our own. This principle has profound educational implications for personal growth, emotional well-being, and spiritual development. One of the first steps in learning to release control to God is recognizing the limitations of human ability. Despite the advancements in knowledge, technology, and resources, people still encounter situations where their efforts fall short. Whether it is an unexpected health diagnosis, a financial setback, or a relationship challenge, these moments highlight the reality that human control is finite. Understanding this truth can help individuals shift their perspective from striving to surrendering. Instead of exhausting themselves trying to manage every detail of their lives, they can learn to trust in God, who is all-knowing and all-powerful. Releasing control begins with a mindset change. People must learn to see God not as a distant figure, but as an active participant in their lives. This perspective is rooted in scriptures such as Proverbs 3:5-6, which instructs believers to trust in the Lord with all their hearts and lean not on their own understanding. In all their ways they are to acknowledge Him, and He will direct their paths. This passage emphasizes that letting go of self-reliance and acknowledging God's wisdom leads to clarity, direction, and peace. Educating individuals on this principle involves teaching them to replace the habit of overthinking and worrying with the habit of seeking God's guidance and trusting His timing. Another vital aspect of releasing control is prayer. Prayer serves as a direct line of communication with God, allowing individuals to bring their concerns, fears, and uncertainties to Him. Through prayer, people learn to hand over their burdens, trusting that God cares for them and is working on their behalf. Teaching the practice of prayer involves showing individuals how to be honest with God about their struggles while also expressing faith in His ability to intervene. It is also important to emphasize that prayer is not about convincing God to follow human plans, but about aligning oneself with His will. The releasing control requires patience and faith. It is often difficult to let go when the desired results do not materialize immediately. This is where the principle of waiting on God becomes essential. Waiting is not passive, it is an active demonstration of trust. It involves continuing to seek God, remaining faithful in one's responsibilities, and believing that His timing is perfect. Teaching individuals the value of waiting helps them develop resilience and prevents them from taking impulsive actions out of fear or frustration. Learning to release control also involves understanding the concept of surrender. Surrender is not giving up, it is giving over. It is about yielding one's plans, dreams, and concerns to God while trusting Him to work everything out for good. This act of surrender allows individuals to experience freedom from anxiety and stress. Teaching this principle encourages people to recognize that surrendering control does not mean a loss of power, but a transfer of responsibility to someone who is infinitely capable. A practical way to teach the importance of releasing control is by examining biblical examples of individuals who trusted God despite uncertainty. For instance, Abraham was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going, yet he obeyed and trusted God to fulfill His promises. Similarly, Hannah surrendered her longing for a child to God through heartfelt prayer and was eventually blessed with a son. These stories illustrate how letting go of control can lead to outcomes that surpass human expectations. Lastly, releasing control to God fosters emotional and mental peace. When individuals stop trying to manage what is beyond their control, they experience relief from the pressure of constant striving. This shift enables them to focus on the present moment and fulfill their responsibilities without being overwhelmed by fear of the future. Teaching this concept involves helping people understand that God's plan is always good, and that trusting Him allows them to live with confidence and hope even in uncertain circumstances. Walking by faith and not by sight is a foundational principle in developing a deep and abiding trust in God. This concept is drawn from 2 Corinthians 5:7, which teaches that believers are called to live according to their trust in God's promises, rather than relying solely on what they can see or understand. It is an invitation to step into a life of dependence on God's wisdom, timing, and direction, even when circumstances appear uncertain or difficult to navigate. Understanding and applying this principle is transformative, offering both spiritual maturity and emotional stability in the face of challenges. Walking by faith begins with understanding that God's perspective is infinitely greater than ours. Human understanding is limited to what can be observed or reasoned, but God's knowledge encompasses all things past, present, and future. Trusting this divine wisdom requires believers to relinquish the need to see the entire path before taking the first step. For example, Abraham's story demonstrates this principle vividly. He was called to leave his home and go to a land God would show him, without being given detailed instructions. His faith in God's promises propelled him forward despite the unknowns, illustrating that faith often involves taking action without complete clarity. One of the critical aspects of walking by faith is learning to trust God's promises over visible circumstances. Life often presents situations that seem overwhelming or impossible, leading individuals to doubt or fear. However, faith requires believers to focus on what God has said rather than what they can see. The story of Peter walking on water illustrates this truth. When Peter focused on Jesus, he was able to do the impossible, but when he shifted his attention to the storm around him, he began to sink. This account teaches that faith thrives when attention is fixed on God's power and faithfulness rather than external challenges. Walking by faith also involves embracing the process of growth and transformation. God often uses seasons of uncertainty to build character and deepen trust. These moments are not meant to discourage, but to refine and prepare individuals for greater purposes. Waiting is a crucial part of this process. In times of waiting, believers learn to depend on God and develop patience, perseverance, and a deeper understanding of His plans. For example, Joseph waited years for the fulfillment of his God-given dreams. During that time, he endured trials and setbacks but remained faithful, trusting that God was working behind the scenes to bring His promises to pass. Faith requires believers to act even when they do not have all the answers. Taking steps of faith does not mean acting recklessly, but responding in obedience to God's guidance and leading. Noah's decision to build an ark despite the absence of visible rain is a powerful example of this principle. His obedience not only saved his family but also demonstrated the rewards of trusting God's instructions, even when they seem illogical by human standards. Educationally, walking by faith teaches resilience and the ability to cope with uncertainty. Faith is not a blind leap but a confident trust based on God's character and promises. When individuals walk by faith, they develop a mindset that embraces uncertainty as an opportunity for growth rather than as a source of fear. This perspective equips them to face life's challenges with courage and hope. Faith is also strengthened through community and shared experiences. Hearing testimonies of how others have trusted God and seen His faithfulness can encourage individuals to walk by faith in their own lives. Fellowship with other believers provides support, accountability, and reminders of God's power and presence. The collective wisdom and encouragement of a faith community reinforce the principle of trusting God even in difficult seasons. Lastly, walking by faith invites believers to live with an eternal perspective. While life's challenges and uncertainties can feel overwhelming, faith reminds individuals that God's plans are not limited to earthly outcomes. He works all things together for eternal purposes, ensuring that every step taken in faith contributes to a greater divine story. Recognizing this truth helps believers remain steadfast and confident in their journey, knowing that their faith is not in vain. Surrendering to God is a profound act of faith that brings freedom and transformation. In a world that emphasizes self-reliance and control, the concept of surrender may seem counterintuitive. Many associate surrender with weakness or failure, but in a spiritual context, surrendering to God is a powerful step toward freedom from anxiety, fear, and the burdens of life. It allows individuals to experience the transformative power of God's grace and align their lives with His perfect will. This principle has significant educational value as it teaches the importance of yielding to God's authority and embracing the growth and peace that come with it. The freedom through surrender begins with recognizing the limitations of human control. People often strive to manage every aspect of their lives, from relationships to finances to future plans. While planning and effort are important, there comes a point where circumstances go beyond human ability to manage. Whether it is a health crisis, a broken relationship, or an unforeseen challenge, these moments reveal the limits of human strength and wisdom. Surrendering to God involves acknowledging that He is sovereign, all-knowing, and capable of handling what we cannot. This realization is liberating because it removes the pressure to solve every problem and control every outcome. Surrender also requires trusting God's character and His plans. It is not a passive act of resignation, but an active decision to place confidence in God's wisdom, love, and ability to work all things for good. Romans 8:28 reminds believers that God works for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Understanding this truth helps individuals release their fears and doubts, knowing that surrendering to God's plan will lead to the best possible outcomes, even if the path is unclear. One of the most significant transformations that comes through surrender is a change in perspective. When individuals surrender their worries and struggles to God, they shift their focus from their limitations to God's unlimited power and resources. This perspective change allows them to approach challenges with faith and hope rather than despair. For example, when Jesus called His disciples to leave their nets and follow Him, they surrendered their livelihoods and familiar routines. In return, they gained a new purpose and perspective that transformed their lives and impacted the world. Surrendering to God also fosters emotional and mental peace. Holding on to control often leads to stress, anxiety, and frustration, especially when things do not go as planned. Surrendering these burdens to God provides a sense of relief and rest. Matthew 11:28-30 offers an invitation to come to Jesus for rest, promising that His yoke is easy and His burden is light. This promise underscores the freedom that comes from giving God the weight of life's challenges and trusting Him to carry them. Transformation through surrender is not limited to external circumstances, it also involves inner growth. When individuals surrender their desires, ambitions, and fears to God, they open themselves to His refining work. God uses surrender to shape character, develop patience, and strengthen faith. This process often involves letting go of pride, self-sufficiency, and the need for control, allowing God to cultivate humility, dependence on Him, and a deeper relationship with Him. A practical example of surrender leading to transformation can be seen in the life of Hannah in the Bible. Hannah longed for a child and experienced deep anguish over her barrenness. When she surrendered her desire to God and vowed to dedicate her child to Him, she found peace even before her prayer was answered. Her story highlights the transformative power of surrender, as she not only received the blessing she desired, but also grew in faith and trust through the process. Surrender also brings alignment with God's purposes. By relinquishing personal agendas and submitting to God's will, individuals position themselves to be used for His greater plans. This alignment often leads to opportunities, relationships, and experiences that surpass anything they could have orchestrated on their own. Surrender is not about giving up on dreams, but about entrusting them to God, who can fulfill them in ways that bring greater joy, impact, than imagined. Finally, surrendering to God provides freedom from fear. Fear often arises from uncertainty and the inability to control outcomes. By surrendering to God, individuals can rest in the assurance that He is in control and that His plans are good. This freedom from fear empowers them to take risks, step into new opportunities, and live with boldness and confidence, knowing that their lives are in the hands of a faithful and loving God.